information on him first before I give him the stage. Brian is from Goshen, Indiana, so all of the icons that you see, they travel with him by car. He lives there with his son and his wife, and he's a convert to Orthodoxy, and it happened in college that he converted, and he studied iconography here in the States as well as in Greece. And after that, in 2007, he has since been commissioned to write many icons. And right now, also, he is the cantor and choir director of his church, St. Mary's Antiochian Orthodox Church. And he is also an ordained reader. Please join me in welcoming Brian.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and more importantly, thank you so much for this commission. This has been such a blessing to meet these icons, and it's I can't thank you enough. So, just collecting my thoughts here. So maybe to begin, it'd be good to talk about the iconostasis in general, and then we can talk about your iconostasis and icons in particular. So the primary icons, and I guess I'm going to start way back, just because I don't know where everyone's coming from, and I think it's good to cover a large area, just so we can include everyone and cover a lot of material that way, and maybe fill in some details that you might not know. So the primary icons are the icons of the Lord and his mother, and Christ is always on the south side of because we're always facing east, even if regardless of the direction the church faces, according to geography, the church always faces east, as we anticipate our Lord's return. So as we're looking at the iconostasis, to our right or to the south is the Lord, and to the north or our left is the Theotokos, his mother. So maybe technically speaking, these are actually the first coming of the Lord and the second coming. So it's his first coming. He's being born as an infant of the Virgin Mary, a very humble and simple, entrance into the world in a cave, the story. And then in his second coming, he comes in glory and in power. He comes as the judge. And so technically, we see, during the Divine Liturgy, we see the priest carrying a beautiful jeweled book around, and it's easy to assume that this is the Gospel book, which it can be. It's not necessarily like it's like a one-for-one thing that it can only mean one thing. It can be the Gospel book, but it can also be the Book of Life. So as Christ returns as the judge, he's holding the Book of Life that we hear about in Revelation. That contains the names of all those who are saved, and he's returning as the judge, and so that book is closed. The list has been completed, the book is closed, and I guess maybe we're getting a little bit specific here, but in icons of the Lord, he's blessing with his right hand, which is that the priest priests bless with their right hand as well. And he holds the book with his left hand. And this calls to mind in Matthew 25, when the Lord talks about his return in the last judgment, and he separates the sheep and the goats. And the sheep, the saved, are at his right side, and the goats, the condemned, are on the left side. And so we can see this, all of this is happening in this icon. So he's blessing with his right hand towards the right side, he's showing mercy, and then towards his left side, he's holding a closed book, in the judgment. So there's this dichotomy of mercy and judgment. You'll also notice that his face is turned ever so slightly towards the right, towards those on the right. And this also works well, now we're getting a bit more specifics, but with his composition, since he's on the right side of the church, our right. He's kind of looking towards the congregation. He's not turning this way, right? He's turning towards where the people are. So it works really well with all of that. So another interesting way to think about the iconostasis as a whole and just in general is that we can think about it as like a chronological, exposition of the history of salvation. So we can think about the holy altar, the sanctuary, as paradise. And so it's kind of interesting in processions. The processions always leave, like anytime anyone leaves the sanctuary, they leave through this deacon door. They leave, they go in the procession, and then the procession returns through this door. And so it's really interesting because if we think about this chronologically, and this is the Lord's first coming, and this is the second coming, we can think about how through our first parents, Adam and Eve, were originally in paradise, and then they left, right? They sinned, they were cast out of paradise, and so even in things like the processions which happen in every service almost, there's a departure from paradise, then the Lord comes, right? And then through these doors is the life of the church, right? So behind the holy doors is the holy altar, and that's the life of the church. That's where we are now, right? We're between the Lord's first coming and his second coming. So all of the sacraments and the life of the church are happening here, right? This is where we are. And we have the Lord's second coming, and then this is the door where everyone enters the sanctuary after the processions, or even, and I'm not sure if this is universal, but at least like in my parish, when before the service or anytime like the acolytes or altar boys or anyone who goes into the sanctuary, they always enter through this door, and it kind of maintains that flow and that movement of kind of telling that salvation story throughout history. So it's just kind of an interesting way how the architecture and the liturgy of the church kind of proclaims the gospel, even in a symbolic way there. So on the holy doors, there are a few traditions. The main tradition is the Annunciation. And there's another tradition that has the four evangelists. Often both of those are on the holy doors. Sometimes you'll have the liturgists, St. John Chrysostom and Basil the Great, but that's kind of less common. So the way the architect designed these doors, it beautifully frames the Annunciation with the Archangel Gabriel announcing to the Mother of God that she will, that she will become the mother of God, that she will bear a son, and his name will be Jesus, and he will be Emmanuel, God with us. So it is because of that event, because Mary said yes. That's why we have salvation. That's that event opens, if you will, it opens the door to our salvation. That's why this icon is on the holy doors. And then we hear about this through the accounts of the four evangelists. So that's why the four evangelists are on that door as well. And that's the priest or the deacon brings the holy gospel through these doors to proclaim the gospel to us. So that's why the evangelists are there. And it's really nice that they're able to incorporate both traditions there, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. So on the deacons' doors, we have the Archangel Michael, and we have the Archangel Gabriel, and these are the two chiefs of the ranks of heavenly hosts, and they're guarding they're guarding the doors to paradise. They're guarding the doors to the sanctuary. And in some ways, it calls to mind Eden, how there's a cherubim guarding Eden. It's an angelic power. It's that kind of idea that we shouldn't. This isn't the place to tread lightly. This isn't the place to just. This is a holy place. We don't just casually enter and go in and out. So, I'll get more into prototypes later, but that's the general idea of where we were going with that. So, just to keep things general here before we go into specifics. On the next icon on the iconoclast, so the principal icons, or they're called despotic, and I don't know if they're that's literally the translation from in Greek these are called the despotic icons, which is the Lord icons basically, and so the main icons are the Lord and his mother, and John the Baptist, and then the patron of the church on the other side. So, there's so many icons with this arrangement of Christ, and then his mother is at his right hand, and then St. John the Baptist is on his left hand. And so whether that's the icon of all saints, or the icon of the Last Judgment, or sometimes there's an icon called Desis, which is Christ in the center and his mother on his right side and St. John on the left side. And this arrangement is universal. You see it many, many places. And then even in the crucifixion, you still have Christ in the middle. You still have his mother on his right, and then you have another St. John. St. John the theologian is on his left, but it's a very similar arrangement there. And so this is in the Byzantine tradition of Greek, I guess the Mediterranean churches, the Greek churches, the Arabic churches. This is universal to have St. John here, and even in the Slavic tradition, it's pretty common. But there's a lot more variety within the Slavic churches. Sometimes the patron is here, and John the Baptist is on the other side, and sometimes St. John is omitted entirely. But the direction from the Metropolitan through Father Ken is that we would have St. John here and follow the more ancient tradition of the Orthodox Church. So, and then the parish. So, and I think at this point this would be a good chance to transition into maybe more specific things about each icon. So, because this is a specific icon for this parish. So Mary, the Mother of God, is the patron of this community, and specifically the feast that you celebrate is her protection. And I'm sure you're aware of the story since this is your parish, but at some point in the history of the Byzantine Empire, there were, I believe there were Slavic invaders. This was before the Slavs were Christianized. These barbaric hordes were encroaching on the city, and they were at the gates, and it looked pretty bleak. And there was a vision of the Theotokos protecting the city, and she was holding her veil over the city in protection, and then the city was saved. And so there's this feast established for that, and then once the Slavs converted to Christianity, it became a really beloved feast for them. It's celebrated much more in the Slavic churches than in the Greek churches today. So it's just a really wonderful feast, and usually, and I'm sure you've seen the icon before many times because it's your feast, but usually you see the Theotokos standing as a full figure, and usually there's a lot of other figures around. Sometimes there's St. Andrew, the Fool for Christ, who had this vision. Sometimes there's other people in the city. Sometimes there's other saints around. Sometimes there's even, I saw an icon in the church. It's wonderful with the city of Corning underneath. It's, so sometimes there's very specific localities. And for, I guess my primary goal, especially with these four despotic icons, these four principal icons, was unity. I wanted this a unity of scale and proportion and color, and I wanted these four, and really all the icons, but especially those four icons to be united. And I didn't want one icon to stand out as it'd be, if you can kind of imagine how different that would look to have these other like half figure icons, and then one that's full figure. So in order to balance the rest of the icons, this was the decision that I made to zoom in on just the most important element of that feast, of Our Lady holding her veil in protection and intercession for us. So the decision was made to the parish, and through Father Penn and through the Metropolitan, the decision was made for half figures. So a panel this size, you could have standing figures, you could have figures that are seated and throned, or we could do like half figures like this. And so the decision was made for half figures. In that way, they're almost life size, right? So it makes it a lot more approachable and a lot more. They kind of command a much better presence in this space.
Yeah, kind of brings it right.
Yeah.
Instead of having a big one, it's just like.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah, she's right there. And I guess it maybe invites an encounter a little bit more. Especially you can see the details, you can see what's going on a little bit more. And if you can imagine a full-size figure, her head would be about that, her face would be about that big. So I think it was a great decision and a great direction. especially when seeing these all in context here. So, I think I really love there's a prototype of the Theotokos called the Platitera, and that's where Christ is like centered on her. And sometimes her hands are raised in prayer like this, and Christ is like kind of mystically, you can see him inside her womb. Sometimes she's holding him like, centered, and so there's some variety of that. And that is an icon that I really love for this space, because it really balances this very symmetrical icon of Christ. But, and that's how I originally sketched it. And then in looking at the sketch, and then also talking to my teacher, I kind of thought it was a little bit too much repetition. It was a little bit like too similar to have two icons of the Theotokos that are almost, very similar. And so I also really love this icon called the Odigetria, which is maybe you could describe it as, or translate that as the way, or she who shows the way, or the guide. So there's a few ways you can kind of look at it, but she's showing us the way. So this is kind of the main feature of this hand. She's pointing to us the way. Christ said, "I am the way, the truth, and the light." And so this is a very ancient icon. This is perhaps the earliest icon that we have was painted by St. Luke, and it was in this style. It was in this pose where the Theotokos is holding the Lord, and then she's pointing to him. And so there are a number of really ancient icons, like from St. Luke's hand, that show this position. And this is also, it's a really special, prototype. The first Orthodox church that I attended, this was the icon of the Mother of God. And, this Odigetria. There's a monastery in Ohio, St. Gregory Palamas, that I love going to, and they have a wonderful copy of the icon Panagia Sumila, which is one of the originals that St. Luke painted. And so, that's another icon that's really special to me. That's this the same prototype. So I was really happy to make that decision to go with that prototype. So that's how we arrived at these two icons. I also wanted to make to bring a little, to bring a little bit more attention to the patron. I made her clothing just a little bit different red. So the Theotokos pretty much always has a red outer garment, and then a blue inner garment, and that's reversed from the Lord. And people can get it's really easy to get really hung up on symbols and what does each color mean. And I don't really want to go into exactly what each color means, but because it's not like a universal thing. But when we think about this as Christ is divine, essentially, you could think about the two colors can represent the two natures of Christ, his divinity and his humanity, and then that doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-to-one thing. It's not like red doesn't mean divinity and blue doesn't mean humanity, because there's lots of saints that wear red and blue, and it doesn't mean, so it's not like a universal thing. It's a way to meditate on this, but it's a nice way to explain why the Theotokos wears different colors than Christ, or rather wear the same colors but reversed. and that Christ was and is divine, and then he clothed himself in humanity, he put on humanity. And Mary has the opposite colors because she's human, but she achieved theosis, she achieved total union with God to the point where she conceived him, physically in her womb. So she's, in her essence, she's human, but she also, in a sense, clothes herself with divinity. So that's a kind of a neat way to look at why their colors are reversed. Again, I wanted to maintain unity, but I also didn't want too much unity. If there's too much unity, then it's just boring, and it's not like if these two icons are almost the same, the same color and the same composition, it's a little bit of variety, it adds interest and it helps move your eye around, it helps you. And so I wanted to bring a little bit more attention to this icon because it is on the periphery, right? It's easy to look at this icon and to look at the center. And so I used a little bit brighter color, a little bit warmer red, a little bit brighter color to help move your eye over here. And then we see the same red in the angel's wings and it's in the Last Supper. So that's, your eye will keep moving around. Anastasis. So, this icon of Christ, Pantocrator, it's, again, it's extremely ancient. I'm sure you're familiar with the famous icon of Christ at Sinai. That's of the same type. There's definitely some elements that I brought from that icon. There's some it's a very common icon. I brought some other elements from some other icons. There's a contemporary Russian iconographer named Father Zenon, Commander Zenon Theodore, and I love his work. It's really clear and beautiful, and so I took some influence from him too on some of these icons. So for St. John, the primary prototype I used. There's a Serbian monastery, and I believe it's the Chani Monastery, which is in Kosovo, and it's there's a really beautiful icon of St. John the Baptist on their iconostasis, and so that was theirs is full length, he's standing, but that was kind of the primary influence for this icon of John the Baptist. And originally, I guess in my color sketches and studies, I was thinking about having him wear green. So sometimes John the Baptist can wear green, sometimes brown. There's quite a bit of variety there. And I thought the green would be nice to kind of connect with the green and the ground. There's some green clothing in the Last Supper. Some of the evangelists are wearing green. But then in my color study, it's just too much green. And so I wanted to warm it up a little bit to match the warmth of the Theotokos on the opposite side of the anastasis. And also to pull some of the brown, some of these warm brown that we have from the beautiful Douglas fir. So that was the decision there. So on the deacon's doors, my primary reference or influence, there's I guess the period that I really love in Byzantine art is there's a period around the year 1000 called the Macedonian Renaissance. And there are a number of really beautiful churches painted, like frescoes painted in Serbia, in the Serbian, like, or I don't know, the Empire Kingdom, and then there's a especially beautiful illuminated manuscript that's commissioned by the Byzantine Empire Emperor Basil II, and this manuscript survives in the Vatican Museum today. And in this manuscript, there's this just incredible icon of the Archangel Michael, and it's pretty similar to this. It's a horizontal image, and so his wings are really spread out. But he just has this, like, I just love this stance of he's just holding his staff, he's just holding his cloak, and there's all these like demons under his feet that he's like slaying. It's just this, and in some ways it's like it was like the first icon that I saw was like he looks really kind of terrifying in that icon, and I thought that was really appropriate for like the guardian of the sanctuary. You know, he's the general, he's like the chief of the angelic hosts, and so that was my primary influence for Saint Michael, the Archangel. And then to make it fit the panel, obviously I brought in the wings and brought in his hands just a little bit. I think in the original his arm is out quite a bit, but so I'm pretty happy with how these angels fit. And then Gabriel is a similar composition. I flipped the symmetry, and then I used all the saints have fairly standard colors and depictions. That's why it's like, even if you can't read the inscriptions, like if you see a bishop with a short white beard and a red vestments, like you don't even need the name, you just recognize him as St. Nicholas. You know, like there's things like that there's some kind of uniformity there. So Gabriel often wears kind of white or kind of a greenish, like a light green. So those are kind of the colors that I went with there. I guess speaking of colors, so I paint with egg tempera, and I guess there's a number of things that I just really love about egg tempera. And I guess the first thing is that it's so luminous and translucent. You can get really deep with layers, and you can really see like layers that go way back. And there's just an incredible depth to the color that isn't present in some other mediums. And another thing I love about egg tempera is that it's like an entirely natural medium. It's like acrylic is like a total mystery to me. It's like an industrial product. Like maybe if I was a chemical engineer, I could understand like how they manufacture these polymers that like do this thing. But egg tempera, like it's just egg yolk and like crushed up rocks and water, and that's all it is. And so I love how simple it is, but it's also such a beautiful medium. It has an incredible depth and richness to it. It also goes I think we have 3,000-year-old egg tempera paintings in Egypt, so it's like something that stands the test of time too. It's what iconographers have used since very early on. So all that being said, one thing that I really like about another thing that I really like about egg tempera is it allows me to bring in a very like personal connection, a very like sense of like home. And so So my family's farm, it's been in the family for over 100 years, and under the topsoil is a vein of yellow clay. And so, so I've taken that yellow clay and I've sifted it and gotten out the impurities, gotten out the rocks and things, and ground it fine into powder, pigment powder. And so I use that, and then I also use eggs from my parents' farm. So it's like I can bring in these like two really wonderful like personal things that like go kind of back to my childhood in some way, and even beyond that. Yeah, and so I did all of the underpainting in that yellow clay on the farm. There's nothing really in like the top layer that like shows like you can't really, but you can kind of, so I kind of went on this rabbit trail because you can kind of see some of this like warm, like, can you see something like it's not just a flat gray. Like, that's one of the beautiful things about like temper I was talking about. It's like it's not just like a flat gray and white. There's like some warmth to it, and that's that like yellow farm clay that's like kind of showing through. You can kind of see some of it on St. John as well. So underneath the angels there's like drapery, and that calls to mind the tabernacle. And so basically, Moses ascended Mount Sinai. He fasted 40 days and prayed for 40 days, and then at the top of the mountain, he was covered in. He entered like the cloud of divine darkness. It's like the mountain of transfiguration. When our Lord was transfigured, there was this divine light, but there's also this cloud of darkness. And in this incredible divine encounter that Moses had, he encountered like God's tent where he dwelt. And so then Moses came down from the mountain and basically recreated that, and that's the tabernacle. Is like this, and that's essentially the same plan that we use, as our churches today, with the holy place, the holy of holies, and then we're staying in the holy place, and then the holy of holies, and so in the tabernacle there's all these veils and curtains, and so that's what's represented by these curtains here. Is kind of this continuity with the Old Testament, with the worship of the Old Testament. Let's see. I guess something I wanted to point out about the evangelists here. So we have they're in the order of the Gospels, in the order of the Bible. So we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So I guess just a few things that are going on here. I guess maybe the main thing I wanted to point out is that St. Luke records. He's the only one that records the Annunciation, and so I really wanted him to be like he's like looking up. He's like observing that. He's like looking up. He's seeing. He's in a sense like mystically watching this event unfold, and then he's telling us about it. So. And then St. Mark, I kind of to maintain balance, like it just looked kind of weird to have just one of them looking up. So there's this kind of balance and unity between St. Mark and St. Luke. St. John is the theologian. He has his gospel so lofty and high and full of theology, so he's pointing up. And then in St. John, kind of half the icons he's wearing red on the outside, the other half he's wearing green. And so, St. Matthew pretty much always wears green and blue. So in order to keep these balanced, otherwise we have like three of them with red and blue, and then one with green. So those two on the outside have green. It keeps a really nice balance there. So I think I've talked about most of the things on the main tier of the iconostasis. I do want to talk about a few things on the last supper, the mystical supper. So the mystical supper is going to go up above here. There's a few things that we're still waiting on to put in the second tier. So that'll be up there eventually. But so this goes above the Holy Doors, and it's I guess it's really easy to understand why the mystical supper is traditional here, because that's where Christ celebrated the Eucharist with his disciples for the first time, and that's where we encounter him today is in the Eucharist, and it's in and this is where we receive the Lord's body and blood, and so it's just a really fitting place for that. So, can you all see this okay? No, I know it'd be easier to see if it was up high there, but so I guess it's overall it's a fairly traditional depiction. The Lord is in the center. His 12 disciples are all around him. And I assume we all know the story. And so I don't need to get into that too much. But I guess some of the specifics and some of the particularities that I think are, like some of the details that I put in, that I think are, I guess because of this, because of its location, it's a very liturgical location. It's very central to the liturgy. I mean, the liturgy itself is Holy Communion. And so I wanted to really reinforce some liturgical elements and aspects within this icon. So maybe the first thing is that there's a chalice and the paten on the table. So some icons in the mystical supper, it's just like the regular dinner table with the regular food. But there are, I thought it was important to include the chalice and the paten with the Eucharistic bread and wine. And then of course Christ is blessing those. Christ is almost always blessing in his icon. He's almost always blessing with his right hand. And he's almost always holding either a book or a scroll. Like if you look at icons of the feasts, Christ is entering Jerusalem, or he's transfigured on the mountain. He's always blessing with his right hand. He's always holding a scroll with his left hand, and that can represent both his teaching and also authority. So Christ is sitting he's sitting within a ciborium, and the ciborium is something that fell out of use I want to talk about a ciborium for a second. So in the earliest churches, the iconostasis developed after iconoclasm. And maybe we're getting kind of technical here, but iconoclasm, as you know, is a period of persecution it was about 150 years, where the official policy of the empire. So we kind of like to think about the good old days when there was an empire, but it's like, well, it wasn't always good because the emperor would get involved in church affairs, and often that was bad. Like often they would support heresies and cause trouble. And so, in addition to supporting sometimes you have good emperors that support the church, and sometimes you have other emperors that support heresy. So for 150 years, the policy was to not allow icons in churches and to destroy icons. And so when iconoclasm came back, when the icons were restored to the church, that's about when the iconostasis developed. And the iconostasis developed from an altar rail. So the earliest churches didn't have an iconostasis, but they did have an altar rail. They had like a low barrier around the altar. I mean, it wasn't just like, like the altar was a separate place. It was an elevated place, it was a holy place. But there was like a lower barrier. And then the icons got placed above, like basically on top of that altar rail. And a lot of traditional Catholic churches and even like I grew up Methodist in our Methodist church growing up, there's an altar rail. And so like a lot of Western churches still maintain that. And then, so you had a pretty clear view of the altar that way, if you can imagine that. Now, in early churches, it wasn't just like an unobstructed view of the altar. There would be a canopy over the altar called a ciborium, if that makes sense. And maybe the most famous ciborium would be the baldacchino at St. Peter's in Rome, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It was this huge, I think it's 100-foot tall canopy over the altar made by Bernini. And on the ciborium, this canopy over the altar, there were curtains around it. Again, like kind of calling back to the Old Testament. And so, just like we have these doors closed, and a lot of churches even have a curtain that's closed like when there's not a service, but then it's open when there is a service. And so the same thing with the ciborium. So a little bit of history there, but you'll see ciborium in different icons, especially of different feasts. Sometimes you'll see a ciborium like representing the temple. So I put this architectural element of the ciborium here to really highlight Christ. Right? He's the only one that's kind of framed in architecture. And then it's not just green, but it's this like liturgical, very specific liturgical structure. And then there's some curtains on there too, as kind of a nod to that. So I guess speaking of architecture, we know that the Last Supper was celebrated in the upper room, so we have a structure here with the stairs going up, kind of to point to that. So I want to tell you who the apostles, who the disciples are here, and I have it written down, but I don't have it with me, so it's in Indiana. So I can tell you the ones that I do know. There's a couple that I not 100% on. So this is Philip. I'm going to come back to him. This is Simon the Zealot. This is James, the son of Alphaeus. This is Matthew, who's also the son of Alphaeus. So they're brothers. This is Peter. This is St. John, the theologian, who's reclining on the Lord's breast. And we hear that from St. John's Gospel. And some icons of the Last Supper, he's like really like leaning over there. I just with the composition, I spread them out a little bit. So St. John, this is St. Andrew. I'm going to come back to these two. This is Judas. So Judas is, the Lord said, one of you will betray me. And they said, who is it? Is it I? And he said, the one who dips his bread in the, and so that's what Judas is doing. He's reaching to get the bread. So, and I guess another interesting feature about icons is that the saints are basically never in profile. right? The saints are always like turned towards us. We always see both eyes of the saints. They're engaged with us, and we can engage with them and interact with them. And pretty much only people that you see in profile are like sinister people, like Judas, sometimes demon. Like I think demons are always in profile. Like when the soldiers are arresting Christ, or when soldiers are killing the saints, there's those are the people that are in profile. They're like turning away from us. They're turning away from God. Like we can't interact with them. Or you know what I mean? Like there's just not this engagement with them. So that's why Judas is in profile. So this is Thomas, and so we're missing Bartholomew, and I really want to say this is Bartholomew. Let's see. Anyway, we can. I'm sorry. I don't have to listen to it. So the table, there's some really wonderful, or at least I remember seeing a table from the Byzantine period. It's this marble table, and it's shaped kind of like the letter D. I guess you could think of it as a U or a D. And basically, on the round part is where the people would sit, and then the flat side is where like the servant would be able to come and go and serve the food. So kind of as a nod to that history, I kind of like that image, and it fit the space really well to do that shape of the table. On the table, there's different. There's bread. There's 5 loaves of bread, which is kind of a nod to there's 5 loaves and 2 fish. If you look carefully, so here's the fish. Kind of as a nod to how the Lord is able to provide food from to everyone. And then in St. John's account, that is in St. John's Gospel. He doesn't record the Last Supper, but his account of the Eucharist is kind of tied in with the miracle of feeding the 5,000. So after the miracle of feeding the 5,000, Christ talks about whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood, has eternal life. And so that's why I incorporated that symbol. It's just I could have put whatever. If you look at other icons, Last Supper. There's just a variety of different food that's on the table. So I thought, well, we should have it should be intentional. There should be some kind of meaning there. There's some cups. There's a picture of wine. I mean, there's some things that are just kind of not arbitrary, but just there's some things that just kind of are fitting for a table. But I was doing a little bit of research. I was like, what kind of food would they have eaten in what first century Jews have eaten at the table. And there's turnips and carrots and different things like that. And actually, I think orange carrots, I want to say, came from the New World, so carrots would have been white at that time. So that's why the carrots are white. They're kind of hard to see the blend in with the table. But another thing that might have been at a table like this, especially a nice meal like this, would be honeycomb, which would have been kind of rare. It's definitely hard to get. It comes at a cost. But when I read okay, so it's possible that they could have eaten honeycomb there, and that of course calls to mind. I believe it's the resurrection account in Luke, where the disciples see the Lord and they think that he's a ghost, and he says, "I'm not a ghost. Give me something to eat, and you can see me eat, and you'll know that I'm not a ghost." And so does anyone remember what they give him? What he eats? Yeah.
Wasn't it fish?
Yeah. So he eats broiled fish, and then there's something else that he eats. What? I think, yeah, so he eats, they give him broiled fish and honeycomb, so that's why, so there's broiled fish, or there's fish and honeycomb there, so I thought it was, a nice way to kind of subtly reference the resurrection. And then with the two fish, there's this really beautiful mosaic it's really early, it's really old, from maybe the 5th century. And there's a church on the Sea of Galilee, at the spot where Christ multiplied the fish and the loaves. And there's this really beautiful mosaic of these fish. And so that was the primary reference that I used in painting those fish there. So I think that's kind of most of the details, most of the things that I wanted to share about those icons. So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I'm very.
Even with the eyes, just the way everything is, like they're looking right at you, can feel that.
That was just what I tried to make. Yeah, try to make them so that they're looking at you. So no matter where you're standing in the church, they're looking at you. For the most part. Some of them, like in this icon, they're looking at each other.
Still, it portrays that. You feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, do you have any questions?
I'm just curious, would you share with everyone how the icons drew you into Orthodox?
Sure, yeah. So a little bit of my story, and so I grew up Methodist. My dad's a Methodist pastor, and I always had a strong faith. We had church and our Christian faith was very important in our family. And I was 16. I was in high school. My family took a trip to the Holy Land, and that was my introduction to Orthodoxy. Was the Church of the Nativity and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it really kind of shook my reality in a lot of ways. And in experiencing something that is so old and so different from anything I'd ever experienced before. And it made a huge impression on me with the icons, but also the incense and the candles and the chanting. And they're just is definitely different from anything I'd experienced before. And it really kind of shook me and kind of got me thinking, there's so many different kinds of Christianity. What's true? What's how did the first Christians worship? What did the first Christians believe? And are there any Christians around, to this day, that still do that? That still believe the same beliefs as the early church and still have the same worship as the early church? And so those are the kind of questions I was trying to figure out. And in college, I guess the churches in the Holy Land made a big impression on me. And I guess I wasn't at a point yet to or I guess I hadn't really had the chance to explore Orthodox. I didn't really realize that it was here in America or whatever. And I remember I was in college, and it was a kind of an offhand comment by a friend. Yeah, did you hear that Jake's attending the Orthodox church now? I was like, wait, what? I didn't realize that they were here, And so that kind of got me thinking, maybe I could actually, check it out. So I went, and I remember it was such a vivid memory. I remember opening, I opened the doors of the church and walked in, and it was like I was back in Jerusalem. It was like the smell, like the incense. It was like the singing. It was like you know how smell is such a strong like memory trigger. It's just such an amazing like experience of like I opened the doors of the church. I was like, I'm in Jerusalem again, and then like going into the church and seeing the icons and and I guess maybe another part of my background, I've always been interested in art. I've always loved drawing and painting, and I studied art in college. I was an art education major, and so as a very visually oriented person, and as an artist myself, coming into entering the church for the first time in like this first couple months of attending the Divine Liturgy and trying to explore and kind of wrestle with the different things and trying to see if this is a place I could land permanently. Like during that process, it just means that the icon made such a huge impression on me that art was such a central element to the Christian faith. And I guess growing up Protestant, like the aesthetics of a Protestant church are like four white walls, in a pulpit, and the main focus of Protestant Christianity is the sermon, and is the the word, everything is focused on the Bible, and only on the Bible, and everything is focused on preaching, which is in words, and there really isn't a visual element, and there's definitely not Orthodox engages all the senses. And you know this, you come to church and you see the icons and you hear the chanting, you smell the incense, and you taste Holy Communion, you touch the icons and you kiss them. There's it engages all the senses. And so I guess being a visually oriented person is just such a welcome experience to enter a church that's art is central to the Orthodox Church, visual arts, and the gospel is presented in so many different ways. It's not just through the words it's not just through words that are on the page or words that are spoken, but it's also presented that this is the gospel. This is the gospel in St. Basil the Great says that icons are the gospel in lines and colors, and it's a different experience. And it's I guess I like to think about how sending a text message is one way to communicate with text message or an email. You can communicate some information that way, but it's an entirely different experience to talk to someone face to face. And that's what icons allow us to do, is to encounter Christ and the saints face to face in a kind of way that transcends words. So that's a little bit of my experience. So, and also, make sure, I guess, I would say kind of my first encounter, I guess it wasn't necessarily a friend inviting me to church, but it was kind of that connection of hey, a friend's, and I ended up saying, hey Jake, can I ever go take you to church? It was that kind of, but it's invite your friends, that's how people come, it is really intimidating to show up by yourself, but if you're hey, come to church, a lot of times yeah, sure, I'll check it out. So do that, and I'm so excited to hear that you have catechumens and that some people that have joined, so it's a wonderful thing. So. Do you have any other questions about any icons or anything? All right, well, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again for this I loved working on this project. It's been such a blessing to me, and it's just, I love working on this project with you. Thank you so much.